Hello everybody, so I finally finished watching The Witcher Netflix Season 2, and after much consideration, I've decided to review it. Now this show, to put it lightly, is controversial. Many fans of the books and games hate it, love it, and don't really care either way. However, this is probably one of the most requested videos I've ever had, so I've decided to review it and share my honest opinion. Now normally my intros are longer than this, but this is going to be a long video, so let's just get straight into it with episode 1. Episode 1, when compared with the rest of Season 2, is for the most part relatively lore accurate. Understand, I don't mean the episode is lore accurate, because I'm sorry guys, but it just isn't. However, what I'm saying is when you compare it with the rest of Season 2, it at least sticks to one of the book's stories kind of closely. This episode is basically a retelling of the story known as A Grain of Truth in the Witcher book The Last Wish, although instead of taking place before Geralt met Ciri, it takes place on their way to Kaer Morhen. For this season, it is an almost impossible task for me to include every single change from the books in this video, so I can't go over everything, but there are many other changes also in the first episode. For example, it has to carry on with the stories from the last season, such as Yennefer tapping into fire magic, saving everyone at Sodden, and now apparently being captured, all of which did not happen in the books. However, when we actually get into the whole Nivellen story, the episode became, at least for me, quite enjoyable. It was not accurate to the book's story, but in my opinion, adding it to Geralt and Ciri's journey to Kaer Morhen is fine. It doesn't detract from the overall story of the books, it makes for some interesting interactions, and all in all, kept a lot of the main beats from the book's story, although with slightly differing tones throughout. There was also some nice scenes with Geralt and Ciri, such as when they're camping together and she's having her nightmare. It's pretty much directly from the books and works really well to build a bit more of a bond with the two, something which I feel was lacking in the previous season due to the removal of the Geralt and Ciri Brokilon story. We also see that Cahir has been captured by Arethusa, I guess, and tortured. This story has been taken from another point in the books, and in the books, Cahir was not captured by the Northern Realms, but by Nilfgaard. All in all, I would say this episode was probably my favourite episode of the entire show, at least the parts including Nivellen and Geralt, and was probably the most accurate, at least this season. I liked a lot of the stuff with the Bruxa, I thought she was very creepy, I thought they did her quite well. I mean, a lot of the makeup and the sets of the show, in my opinion, seem quite kind of fake, but all in all, I thought it was quite interesting, and I did really enjoy this episode. I thought it was a really good episode, at least compared to the other episodes I've seen. Episode 2 begins by showing us what happened to Yennefer and Fringilla, who were captured in the previous episode by the elves. They're taken to some elven ruins in some forest and meet Francesca Findabair, who is ruling over some local elves, including Filavandrel. So, first thing guys, none of this, and I mean in no way, except Francesca eventually working with Filavandrel, happened in the books. This isn't even an adaptation of anything. It is literally just made up by the writers. As you can imagine at this point, I was quite confused, as the previous episode, although not exactly lore accurate, did at least adapt stuff from the books, kind of. This is just completely different. So, we then see Ciri and Geralt arrive at Kaer Morhen. Personally, I'm not a fan of the way Kaer Morhen looks in the show. It's just far too rocky for me and far too sort of cold and desolate. But this is just a personal taste. Kaer Morhen is just meant to be a fortress in the mountains, so it being covered in snow and rocks isn't unplausible, so this is just my kind of problem. But then we get to probably one of my least favourite parts of this adaptation, when they actually arrive at Kaer Morhen and meet the witches. The many, many witches. In the books, there are only 4 witches in Kaer Morhen: Cohen, Lambert, Vesemir, and Eskel. In the show, however, there are just so many. In addition, the portrayal of both Eskel and Lambert is not something I enjoyed at all. Lambert seems like a kinda drunk asshole, whereas before I would have described him as an annoying younger brother, and Eskel is just... Eskel is just the worst. I'm sorry guys. He also reveals he was attacked by a Leshen, which becomes important later on. Vesemir, at least in this episode, is fine. His looks are very clearly inspired by the games, but obviously I'm not going to pretend this is a problem for me. You guys know that I love the games, and maybe even a lot of you think this is clouding my judgment, but I'm fine with this. This episode then featured a really nice scene with Geralt and Vesemir, who in my opinion actually have pretty good chemistry in the show. We then have some more stuff with Fringilla and Yennefer, which... I mean, yeah, it's just more of the same, honestly. We then have another scene with prostitutes at Kaer Morhen, which, yet again, just didn't happen in the books. Kaer Morhen is nowhere near anywhere, so I have no idea where they came from. they were just apparently down the mountain. No idea where, or how they were convinced by Eskel to come to Kaer Morhen. This whole section was just really weird and didn't really add anything to the story, so it was kind of unnecessary to me. It felt like it was just added so Eskel could have a kind of sex scene. I don't really see why they needed to be there, what they added, what that even meant for anything, really. But anyway, Eskel then turns into a Leshen-type creature and is killed by Vesemir and Geralt. A funeral is held and Ciri begins her training. Eskel's death would have upset me a lot more, as I can tell it has upset a lot of people based on some of the comments I've been getting, but as I will hopefully reveal by the end of today's video, I don't really care that much. I've heard a lot of people argue that in the books, Eskel is a minor character and it's fine he was killed. I think that's true, but they added so many nameless, unnecessary witches, and I don't see why it couldn't have just been one of them. It has pretty much the same effect. All this change does is annoy booking game fans, and everyone else doesn't even know who he is anyway, so they probably just don't care. This honestly was just such a weird change, and makes no sense to me at all. Meanwhile, there's a whole other subplot going on with Fringilla, Yen, and Francesca. There's a creature which is kind of like a female Gaunter O'Dim, and she promises them whatever they want. They get released, and Fringilla and Francesca team up to make the elves fight with Nilfgaard. We also find out that Yen has lost her magic because she tapped into fire magic. This is clearly inspired, if not, I guess, adapted, from something that happens to Ciri later in the books, which is almost identical, although spoilers, far more permanent for Ciri. Also after this, Yen gets set free or something. Okay, so, nothing, except from Ciri going to Kaer Morhen and beginning her training and meeting Lambert, Cohen, Eskel and Vesemir, happened in the book. Seriously, nothing. Yeah. Episode 3 continues with us seeing some Ciri training clips, which I actually liked. This is something that definitely could have happened in the books, although we never really properly hear about her training in this much detail. I actually really like this choice, as it enhances what is established to have happened in the books, and really shows us more detail where before there wasn't really that much. We then get some more story with Yen returning to Aretuza. Everyone thought she was dead at the Battle of Sodden, so at least Tissaira was happy she wasn't. We hear some exposition about Folka, and Stregobor looks into Yen's mind as he thinks she might be a Nilfgaardian spy, the conclusion being that Yen must now kill Kahir, although she ultimately decides to set him free and flee with him. There's a few more scenes at Kaer Morhen of Ciri training, and some more nice scenes with Geralt and Vesemir. Geralt and Ciri eventually fight another monster at the end of the episode, heading for Ciri and kill it. Okay, so again, other than, I guess, Ciri training, pretty much nothing in this episode happens in the books. So, let's go on to episode 4. Episode 4 opens with a scene almost directly from the books, although of course with a few changes. It shows Triss travelling to Kaer Morhen and encountering Ciri on the way. We then see the continuation of the Yennefer and Kahir story and some elf racism, which of course happens in The Witcher, but the way it's portrayed in the show is far more extreme and in-depth. It actually felt very inspired by The Witcher 3 and the elven hatred shown by Radovid and his witch hunters. Elves are now hated because apparently Fringilla and Francesca have turned Sintra into an elven kingdom and given it back its original elven name. We then meet Dijkstra, who I think is actually being portrayed quite well for the most part, although his plans are of course completely different in the books. We see more of Kahir, who is again just a bad person for the most part in the show. I mean, Kahir is just completely different to his character in the books. I just do not understand what they've decided to do with him. We get some good chemistry with Triss and Geralt, which to me is sort of funny, as their chemistry is definitely better and more believable than Yen and Geralt's chemistry in the show, at least from what I feel when I see them together. It felt like Triss and Geralt actually kind of liked each other, which is quite interesting. There's then more Yen story, and we meet Jaskier, or Dandelion as I feel more comfortable calling him, who's working to help the elves get to Sintra where they're not being persecuted. Kahir and Yen tag along after an adventure in the sewers. However, Jaskier gets captured by Rience. After finishing this episode, I would say it was actually quite accurate compared to most of the episodes in the show, as it actually adapted a bit of the books. When Triss met Ciri and talked to the Witchers and showed that she was attracted to Geralt, and also when Dandelion got captured by Rience, although of course it was completely different in the books, just completely different. So all in all, compared to the other episodes, this one was slightly more accurate. Episode 5 starts with the introduction of Rience, and honestly, I think Rience actually looks pretty accurate compared to most in the show, and has been portrayed pretty well. I also like the portrayal of Lydia. All in all, this scene was actually quite cool. We start to learn that the Elder Blood was apparently used in the first Witcher mutagens, and Vesemir becomes a little bit interested in Ciri's blood, even asking Triss for help. Geralt also goes to investigate something called the obelisks, which were described as having been brought into the world during the conjunction of the spheres. One of these was destroyed by Ciri when the evil Kahir was trying to capture her. Yet again, this did not happen in the books. Yennefer rescues Jaskier from Rience, which actually happened in the books, although of course in a completely different place and time, and in an almost completely different way, except she scarred him as well, which also happened in the books. After this, Yennefer got herself captured, and Jaskier goes to find her. She uses a spell seen in a previous episode to visit the female Gaunter from before, and Dandelion gets captured. Yet again, none of this happened in the books. Vesemir tries to get Ciri to give him her blood, and she agrees if she can be a Witcher. We see that Fringilla and Francesca have set up their fake Dolblathana, Sintra, and Kahir arrives there, and of course is still a dick, with a spy that you may remember from the previous season, the elf with Ciri and Broccolon. Geralt also investigates the pillar, and whilst doing this, Triss looks into Ciri's mind, causing the pillar to kind of activate and almost kill him. He then returns to Kaer Morhen to find Vesemir trying to turn Ciri into a Witcher. Geralt stops him. There's also some stuff with female Gaunter and Yen having to go and bring her Ciri, and yet again, none of this happens in the books. Honestly, making Vesemir this Witcher-turning obsessed guy is more in line with a few moments in the games than the books, but cranked up to maybe, 1,000. All in all, other than Yennefer rescuing Dandelion, pretty much nothing in this episode happened in the books, so compared to a lot of the other episodes, this episode was pretty accurate. Episode 6 begins with Geralt finally taking Ciri to Ellander to see Mother Nenneke, which happened in the books, but then Rience goes to Kaer Morhen because apparently he just knows where the hidden witch keep is. He attacks Vesemir, Roach dies to a monster, Ciri accidentally summoned at the monolith. Geralt and Ciri get to Mother Nenneke and eventually meet Yen there, although not for long, as shortly after, Rience arrives and Yen and Ciri escape, with Yennefer trying to trick Ciri to go to female Gaunter. There's also more stuff with Fringilla and Francesca and her elven baby, and Kahir yet again being a dick, and then Triss left Kaer Morhen to tell Tissaia about Ciri, who she is now scared of. Yet again, none of this happens in the books. Well, except that Ciri and Geralt went to Mother Nenneke and Ciri got trained by Yen a little. That's pretty much the only part. There's also this strange subplot about drawing on fire with Rience. Using magic that can summon fire is not necessarily bad, just drawing on fire is. But then again, the show is just doing their own thing with magic. It's not the same to the books at all, past some very minor similarities, so I think me judging it by book standards just doesn't really make sense at this point, so I'm going to try and avoid looking into that too deeply. Episode 7 features scenes involving Ciri and Yen travelling to female Gaunter, Geralt talking to Mother Nenneke, and Geralt travelling to get Ciri from Yen, who he realises is taking Ciri to female Gaunter. We also see a relationship that apparently has blossomed between Tissaia and Vilgefortz. Fringilla kills a bunch of Nilfgaardian generals, except Kahir, who she needs to tell Emir that she's great, despite her failure with the elves who no longer want to fight as Francesca gave birth, making them believe that there can now be more elves and there's a future for their race. Geralt catches up to Ciri and Yen and goes to kill female Gaunter after getting a bit mad at Yen. But female Gaunter gets empowered after Francesca's baby is killed and possesses Ciri, and the episode ends. Literally nothing in this episode happened in the books, so there's that. In episode 8, female Gaunter possesses Ciri, gets to Kaer Morhen, kills a bunch of the added witches, then Geralt and Yen arrive there too. The witches all get a bit mad and try to find Ciri to murder her. Actual Ciri is meanwhile having a nice vision of her friends and family at Sintra. The elves are also all a little mad about their baby being killed, so they go on a rampage on their own and kill a bunch of human babies. The witches fight possessed Ciri, who brings in some monsters, killing some more of the added witches, and Vesemir becomes hellbent on killing Ciri, which, as I'm sure you know, is very in character for Vesemir. Anyway, they eventually save Ciri, who transports them to another sphere where the Wild Hunt are for some reason, but they escape. Meanwhile, the Northern Kings decide to have Ciri killed after realizing that she's more trouble than she's worth. as apparently Sintra is the crown jewel of the north, and they don't want Vesemir and Dijkstra having her. There's then a scene with Fringilla, Kahir, and finally Emir, who openly reveals he's Ciri's father, which in the books is a major reveal at the end of the books, and a major secret kept throughout the entirety of the books by Emir. He also reveals he killed the elven baby to make the elves think Redania did it and make them fight the north as they didn't want to help because of the baby. Yeah, again, pretty much nothing in this episode happened in the books. Yeah, pretty much nothing of this happened in the books, I'm pretty sure. So, this brings me to the end of my breakdown of the show. So now for my review. I'm just gonna get straight to it, guys. I would say that this show is not what I consider The Witcher. As I'm sure you can gather from this breakdown, it just strays too far from the source material. However, as a show, I can understand why so many people love it. It's a decent fantasy show with a decent story, but for me the show has reached a point where it feels that if the goal is to produce an even slightly accurate adaptation of The Witcher source material, it cannot happen. It basically just pulls elements of the Witcher book's story and strings them together in a vaguely chronological way, then adds a bunch of fanfiction to it. In fact, I'd say it's objectively true at this point that the show is more fanfiction than Witcher adaptation. It isn't really an adaptation, it's almost an entire original story set in an almost entire original universe. All that's shared are some elements of the Witcher story, some elements of the characters, and the names of some locations, and I guess the names of some monsters too. That's about it. Everything, down to the way the world works, the way monsters work, the way most characters are portrayed and represented, is entirely different from the books. The only characters I would say are true in most ways to their book counterparts are Geralt, Dandelion, Vesemir, maybe Dijkstra, and occasionally Ciri? This show does not adapt The Witcher, it has basically just created its own story with some elements of The Witcher. If you're using this as a way to understand The Witcher backstory to the games, or as a replacement for the books, you basically learn little to nothing about the backstory of what happened in the books. In short, if you want to understand the backstory to The Witcher 3, or the story of the Witcher books, not even in full, I mean even in a basic sense, the best and easiest option right now is the books, which luckily give you an in-depth sense as well. All in all, I understand why so many people are enjoying this show, and if it didn't have Witcher names attached to it, I might even enjoy it as well. And honestly, if you consider it The Witcher, that's fair enough. People are entitled to their own opinions. Honestly, it's completely fine, and I'm happy that you enjoy it. But for me, this show is just not The Witcher. It's not even an adaptation or interpretation of the books and source material. It misses far too much and adds far too much. Although it changes everything it actually adapts from the books, it doesn't even adapt enough to call it an adaptation in my opinion. It is basically an almost entirely original universe with almost original characters. It is, in the most true sense, a Netflix adaptation. But that's it for my review of The Witcher Netflix Season 2. I would really love to hear all your thoughts in the comments below, because as I said, I don't hate the show. I just really don't consider it what I would think of as The Witcher at this point, and therefore it's quite hard for me to enjoy it as I'm hearing all these names I recognize and different things I kind of recognize, but it's just so far removed from what it actually is that it's kind of distracting for me. So if you agree or disagree, just let me know, I'm genuinely very curious. Be sure to check out my second channel, WitcherGeorge. I've been doing some videos on there recently that I'm actually quite happy with, and I'll be putting out some more on there soon, so check it out. I really appreciate you guys checking those videos out. I've been really enjoying making them actually, so just thank you if you do that. Of course, like today's video, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter. But thank you for watching everyone, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. I'm really sorry if anyone's a bit upset with today's video, but I just had to be honest about this show and tell you guys what I think about it. And as I said, just please let me know what you think. I'll see you guys later. Thank you for watching.